I would like to think we're a long ways away from something like that, but this is the reason to prepare and to prepare, long before you see cracks like this in the seams. But again, I would just simply submit, what would this country look like if it weren't for the $9 trillion that the Fed has sprinkled around all over the place over the last year and a half? Would it be chaotic? Would we see things like we saw all of last year? The answer to me would be probably so, yes.
Welcome back to Wall Street Silver. We have a fabulous roundtable today. I'd like to thank Mario, Maneco. I'm always pronouncing that wrong. Is it?
That's right, Maneco64. Yeah.
I saw people in the comments of your videos were criticizing me for always mispronouncing that. Maneco64. Thank you, sir. And the wonderful Andy Schectman, my expert analyst who's on whenever I need him. Thank you from Miles Franklin. Thank you for showing up. I appreciate it, guys.
Anytime, Jimmy. Anytime, Lee. Good to see you both.
So we're going to be covering Cuba today. It's in the news. People are protesting. I don't think it's risen quite yet to the level of rioting, but I saw that police officers are starting to join the protest, which is sort of the new element about this. When the tools of the state start joining in the protest, it's serious, right? Who's gonna knock it down if the police are on the side of the protesters? And I wanted to get your guys' take. The media seems to be going one way with this. I think it's maybe not. Mario, what do you think is causing these protests in Cuba? You've been on this issue before.
Yeah, apart from the history, which I won't touch upon, I think Cuba is a very poor country. There is, of course, probably an elite who do quite well, like in the old Soviet Union. But I think it hasn't helped, the situation in the last 16 months with all the rising prices of commodities, all the supply chain disruptions, shortages, and even before the crisis that we've been under, Cuba had a lot of problems, a lot of shortage of foreign exchange reserves. They didn't have that much. They've been, basically cut off from the dollar for 60 years. They do earn foreign currency from other tourists, from tourists that come from Canada and even Europe. But Americans have been cut off from Cuba for 60 years. And I think it's just culminating. And the people there are generally very nice, well-educated. They seem pretty healthy, but they don't have all the material things that we have here. And I think it's probably getting really worse now. General Celente says, when people don't have anything, when they lose everything, they don't care. There comes a point where they protest. And the media, I think we have to be careful with what we see from the media, because it's coming from the fake media, right? Even though, we can see there's a lot of protests going on there, but I would be careful in buying everything they tell us. It's not as black and white, but I'm not saying Cuba is a great place, but, and it's not. And they've had a lot of problems, of course.
Andy, what do you see in there? What's your take on it all?
First of all, when we talk about the media, I've kind of watched from afar and wondered, why is it that you're seeing something very similar happening in Haiti with the communist regime, and yet the American government and the American press has very little, if anything, to say about it. Yet you have a couple of protests, and now every single news station has got boots on the ground in Cuba. I would ask to take it a step further and say, what would the United States inner cities look like if there were no, if the government hadn't stepped in over the last 18 months with stimulus? What would happen if we woke up to no entitlements, no food stamps, no welfare checks? Would we be that far different than a third world country like Cuba? We're already indebted as if we are a banana republic. when Gerald Celente says people who've lost everything lose it, I understand that. So what would happen if we were like a country who didn't have the ability just to create money with a keystroke and go full modern monetary theory? I think it's tragic what's happening to the people, obviously, in Cuba, but I think that it's, I've always found it a little bit hypocritical how the US can pick and choose which battles to make important and which to just ignore. But I would submit to you that, honestly, and I know this sounds a little far-fetched, but I now live in Florida, but what I saw in Minnesota the last year and a half is something that I would have bet my life in 2019, no matter how crazy it got, we never would have seen. I would have bet that there would have been nothing that would have made me leave Minnesota. I think if 2020 has taught me anything, it's that anything can happen. But ask yourselves that question. What would inner city Chicago look like? Inner city Detroit, Manhattan? What would it look like here in the United States if the government hadn't stepped in to do what they did? And I would submit it wouldn't be too far different than massive rioting and craziness and burning and looting. And anyone who thinks I'm wrong, just go back and look at the videos of what Minneapolis looked like a few months ago. I'll tell you, I don't think it would be very much different.
Lee?
How much do you, I mean, obviously the globe is having issues with supply chain. How much do you think that had an influence on what's developing down there?
Well, obviously, I think it's big. I think it's big everywhere. The supply chain disruptions are immense, and that doesn't help when you have U.S. sanctions also. So, the supply chain problems, the sanctions, I'm sure it's immense. It's huge. If you're hungry, if you can't get medicine, if you can't get fuel, if you can't get basic necessities for life, yeah. And that's where Gerald Celente comes up with that comment. If you've lost everything, you lose it. What do you have to lose at that point? We're not too far removed from the hate from the Cuban people, the way that they're reacting. It's just that we have a government who is able to paper so much of this over for now that it's kind of quelled the violence and quelled the outrage. But this is one of the reasons why I think you're seeing, a lot of countries look to perhaps the new system that the BRICS nations have implemented, where they can sidestep the SWIFT system, which the SWIFT system they use to impose sanctions on so many countries if they want. And so, I mean, all of these things lead me to believe that we are getting close to a real change, and a real change, perhaps, away from U.S. dominance.
I saw a statistic once that if 40% of your income is going for food, that's when societies start experiencing social unrest. And I think it's even far beyond that. I've seen reports that on the black market, the Cubans have lost, they've had 300% type inflation. Ignore the official numbers. We're talking what the real market is under the hood in the past year. Mario, what do you think about it? People get desperate when they get, we're not talking about first world standards. We're talking Cuban standards.
Yeah.
It's lost of
I think it has to be the food and energy, I would say, because from watching the little videos I watched on YouTube about Cuba, and this guy really didn't go just to Havana, he went everywhere. The people there live very frugal, like they don't have, televisions, cars, they just subsistence living. And like you said, 40% food, and I would say energy. He showed an example of someone having to travel like 4 or 6 hours a day just to get to work and come back home. So if fuel prices are going up, that's going to affect it as well. And I would say it's very convenient for Western countries to point out in the mainstream media the crisis in Cuba, to focus on it. We had protests here in London a few weeks ago, and there are hundreds of thousands of protesters, and the mainstream media didn't cover it. And a month before that, we had the same, and they said there were 200 people. So I think it's convenient for them to focus on it as well. And I'm not saying there's nothing happening in Cuba, but yeah, I think it's all to do, you know, and I've seen the headlines, but I haven't really read in detail, but I can bet it's to do with food prices, you know, energy prices, and like people are having a tough time.
You know, we look at this situation and we think to ourselves, we're protecting ourselves with gold and silver from this kind of thing to some extent. You have to wonder if there's any gold or silver left in Cuba after decades upon decades of this. You guys think there is?
Just a
Certainly not in the hands of the people.
No, just the Castro brothers probably, or whatever's left of them, they brought the gold and silver. I think the one good commodity, that valuable commodity that they might still have is tobacco, you know, for the cigars.
Yeah.
But I don't think they have any gold and silver left.
You know, just on a corollary note, I found it interesting when you talk about preparedness and the way that certain cultures think. Alistair McLeod came out the other day and said he thought that China had 38,000 tons of gold, of which 18,000 of those tons belonged in the hands of people. And when you talk about preparedness in a country like Cuba, certainly I would think that, you know, it's very little, if any, anything outside the dollar except things barterable like tobacco, or happen to live on a farm and can give some apples or whatever it may be. But yeah, that's a sad story. And again, it should make everyone here in the United States take a moment and reflect. And you know, I would like to think we're a long ways away from something like that, but this is the reason to prepare, and to prepare you know, long before you see cracks like this in the seams. But again, I would just simply submit, what would this country look like if it weren't for the $9 trillion that the Fed has sprinkled around all over the place over the last year and a half? Would it be chaotic? Would we see things like we saw all of last year? The answer to me would be probably so, yes.
Well, Andy, that raises a good point. Preparing, it's about, you know, in our community, it's all about silver and to a lesser extent gold. But me personally, I do a lot more than just, you know, physical metal will take you so far, but if there's actual shortages of basic living commodities, and we're not expecting that in the first world, in the United States and Europe, but it could certainly happen. I mean, our supply chains are so stretched right now. We're so vulnerable to cyber attacks. If like the Colonial Pipeline's taken out of action, guess what? All those 18-wheel long-haul truckers can't get food to the grocery stores. I mean, we are incredibly fragile. And so my wife and I, we've adopted a policy of having non-perishable, you know, I haven't gone full prepper. I don't live out in the country or any countryside or anything, but we're keeping 60 days worth of food in the house now that's non-perishable. And luckily I'm a few pounds overweight, so I could stand to actually go on a diet and skip a few meals. But you know, people need to be prepared to survive a 60-day disruption, I think. Or I don't know if you guys think the same way. Are you guys preparing in any way the same in along those lines?
100%. I don't know about Mario, but I have for a very, very long time. People think I'm crazy who know me real well. The Titanic never was supposed to sink. That's why there weren't enough life rafts. What do you have to lose for being prepared with water and food? Food for Patriots is a place that I bought food from several years ago. It's good for 25 years. It comes in big tubs. It's freeze-dried. Hope to God you never need to use it, but if you do, what happens? And when you go to Costco, every time you're there, get a few extra, you know, big things of peanut butter and tuna fish and beans and whatever else, and write on a magic marker the day that you brought them home so that you can rotate them and use them before they go bad, or donate them to a food shelf or whatever it may be. But 100%. And I think these are lessons that people should learn, and to think that it can never happen here is a big mistake. And I would like to think it probably won't happen here, but.
Well, you know, I have to say, being on this channel and doing so many interviews, it's turned me into more of a prepper. I'm curious. I'm curious, Mario. What you know? You interviewed Bjorn was a week or two ago, right? I follow his channel, and he seems to be a bit of a prepper. Is there much of a prepper community in Europe?
Not as much probably as in the US. And I have to admit, I don't hold as much stuff as Andy might, but I have been in the last year buying a few more things. I mean, last year when things kicked off, I did buy quite a bit of things and nothing happens. I've listened to Star Path Academy. He's a guy on YouTube who lived through the hyperinflation in Romania in the 90s, which was, he's done some really interesting videos about prepping. And the other thing he says, you know, if the money goes bad, there will be no supply of anything. Even if there is supply out there, the people who produce those supplies, they won't want to part with it if the money is bad. So it could happen anywhere. But yeah, I'll be interviewing him on Saturday. Hopefully I'll get some good pointers from him.
And,
You know, I made a trip to BJ's this weekend, and I bought a 8-can pack of beans.
uh-huh.
Just a year or two ago, those things were like $6.
What are they now?
Over $9 this weekend, and I'm like, you know, I'm putting all this money in silver. Probably better to invest in beans. You know,
Well, it's also important to know that the CPI doesn't measure food, so you know it's convenient. But yeah, we're seeing inflation. John Williams says we're on the heels of hyperinflation now. Are we? Don't know. But I think John Williams is more or less a legend in this industry, and I don't discount anything he says. He says real inflation right now is closer to 12% than the 5% transitory numbers that we are being told. I think preparing is wise. I think we repair in other ways. We just don't realize it's preparation. I mean, car insurance, home insurance, health insurance, insurance is preparation. It's just preparation you hope you never need to call on or count in. And well, let's say count on, and the same thing is true here. And I think when we see things like this, not too far from home, we should all take heed. No, I think it's important, Jimmy and Lee and Mario, that we revisit this kind of stuff once in a while, not always talk about finance, real world stuff. And, you know, when COVID hit the beginning of 2020, I think if we're all being honest with each other, deep down, we were all a little freaked out, not knowing what tomorrow was going to bring. I'm sure everyone ran to the grocery store to get what they could.
Toilet paper.
Yeah, whatever. And that's the point, you know, it's so, you know, I just moved to Florida here, but, you know, I live in a golf community, talking with a lot of the guys I play golf with in the morning. And they say, you know, it's a crazy experience when a hurricane comes. Within 3 days, all the shelves are completely empty. Dog food's gone, you know, basic necessities gone. And plywood to board up your windows gone. Gasoline gone at gas stations. I mean, the point of it is that if a supply chain disruption becomes real, or a hyperinflationary event or a currency event happens and becomes real, we're not so far removed, because we're a just-in-time country. Everything is just in time. And if that gets disrupted, how far removed are we, I guess, is the question. And from a situation like we're seeing in Cuba. So my heart goes out to them, and I hope they're able to, you know, to get a little bit of relief. Certainly food and fuel, at least. You hate to see people suffer, for sure.
Yeah, thanks for talking, guys. Thanks for being available on short notice. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, you guys all stay well.